live. Hello everyone, and as you join us, we will be able to see your comments. Let us know when you join us, and glad that you could be with us today as we make a redo of the last video of Blocking Set Part 2. But since that video went live a number of months ago, there have been some developments since then. In thought and in application and being able to teach it. So I'm actually really glad Professor Cole is able to be with us today to look through these things and to look at Infinite Insights in a couple of YouTube videos and discuss what it's like as instructors to teach blocking set, as it's formerly called, and things that we can do to make it easier on us and to make it more applicable to our students. With that, I will hand it over to Professor Cole for a little bit as we start looking at Infinite Insights. I wish the PDF version had the page numbers on it, but it's right at the beginning of it. Discusses the hammering inward and thrusting inward blocks, and we're right to the top portion of the conceptual box.
Okay, we're talking about that will be starting at page 11. Frank Trejo from the front to the side, and then on the 45.
Correct.
Now, interesting thing. It's interesting that you can see something and not see it for decades. As you look at Frank Trejo from the side on page 11, there's a box and there's a rectangle. Did you notice that? Mm-hmm. Well, there's nothing new under the sun. I just, I had to find a reason for it to be there that suited me. Okay, so we're talking about he's in a horse stance, and then then we go to page 13. Now, page 13 has 9 photos, and we're going to be talking about the hammering inward block. Now, there's a difference between the hammering inward block of the time that this book was published and what was shown to me in 1989, 90. And that hammering inward block is not the same as that you'll see in the book. The hammering inward block is, to use a common American Kenpo term, is a squeegee motion or a path of action. So we're in 1, 2, 3, the first 3 pictures from left to right at the top. Trejo has that arm cocked up at his shoulder. It's showing all 3 of those. And then the next 3 panels down, he's gotten halfway through that square. 1, 2, and 3. And at the last 3, he's hit the corner of the box from front, side, and on 45. So that is I can look at that myself and say, hey, that's more of a thrusting inward block than it is anything else.
Yeah.
With the exception that it's coming from the shoulder in a chambered position. When I show people a thrusting inward block to the outside of the arm, it more or less comes from a point of origin near your hip. And one of the developments that we've had since the last video was something called a pass-through chamber. It's another one of those things you look at and you go, that needs a name. That needs a name. It really does. And a pass-through chamber would change that block on page 13 to a thrusting inward block. So we're not just saying this is a hammering inward block. We're saying this is how you get to a thrusting inward block using the new term. And page 14 is posturing. There you go. Page 15 still hammering inward. Is this the one where he uses the knife?
The knife, yeah.
So on page 15, he's using the knife. Notice that he's got his hand cocked here. The knife is to the outside. Actually, when he gets to here, he's locked He's put the knife in the direction of the travel, and then he's extending his arm. His arm is higher.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting because he's using the point of the knife
Mm-hmm.
to hit the corner. He's not using his hand. He's using the point of the knife. Now, this is why another thing that the development that's come about, the margin of error for the knife is the blade. So as he comes out there, there's a margin of error. If you look at that karambit that Chris has in his hand, the spine is the notch, is the part with the circles, and the edge, of course, is the cutting edge. So when that hand comes out to the midpoint, what has he got? He's got basically a parry motion or a righting motion. He doesn't have to present to the corner by stabbing. So that means that he can flip the handle up, come down over the top of the arm, and then he can do that motion there. So it's interesting that I never really saw this before, but Mr. Trejo definitely is poking the corner of the box. His hand is not there. That should tell you something. I'll let you figure it out. Enough people have told me that stuff like way too many times. Okay. Thrusting inward block. Page 16. It shows the line of attack. Because, and I use the word line of attack. Should I use that? I don't. Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't. But it shows from the horse stance how he goes from the point of origin of his hip to the corner of the box of the square. Well, if your hand is down, you don't chamber your hand. In a real situation, chambering your hand when somebody starts to come after you is not something, unless you're always doing things in a horse stance, it's just not something that you're going to be able to effectively use. That's why pass-through chamber allows you to come to that chamber position and then focus that in there, because it allows you to get your hand in your peripheral vision. As you put your hand down by your thigh, it's really not in peripheral vision. You know, I mean, Dr. Dave talks about big circles and doing things that come from the back 40 and all that other stuff. But that starts from the hand down, right? So we talk. This is the mother move. Now, mother and father method. I had to come up with a word for it, and so it's method. But mother and father method is the system in its beginnings and all the way up through, say, what would you say, Chris, about green?
Yeah, about green.
Yeah. Whether you're 24 or 16, it doesn't really matter. But through up to green and part of first brown in the 16 system, mother and father are very, very important because they're reinforcing blocks that you find in block set from American Kenpo and deflection set in Christian Kenpo and Island Kenpo. So on page 17, you got Frank stepping back. The diagram tells us to step in a circle. So we wouldn't step into a step on the circle or use the perimeter of the area. We would use we wouldn't use the perimeter of the angle to step back. We would use the area of the angle, which is another, it's not a new thing, but when you look at the book, you say, okay, well, that's the perimeter of the angle he's stepping on, which means he's stepping to the outside of the circle. The area of the angle means we'd step back naturally, which is a lot better because as I say I'm going to step back to a right stance, as my left foot starts to move out, my head hasn't moved. But if I use the angle of the area, and as I step back, my head moves back. So the whole thing about don't be there is kind of important. Okay, so he's on page 17. He's showing that the final motion of stepping back with the thrusting inward block. And it's interesting that they didn't think to make the square more of a trapezoid. That line, I have it written down in the margins, where it's a square with a triangle on top. So I think it's interesting that they did that. So the two things to take away from that is things have changed, and this is not something that is Ed Parker thing. He may have been doing it. I may have seen it. I probably saw him do it. Who's going to say, don't do that, Mr. Parker? So, and so what we're talking about this in the thrusting inward block, we're going to a corner that doesn't match the square in the picture. Now, if you remember, Chris, there's that video of Mr. Parker lamenting that he did not spend enough time, in his opinion, on what the attacker was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We tend to feature only cancellation, height, width, and depth, which is, that's a staple of Kenpo. But he didn't spend much time, apparently, on what the attacker was doing, which left open the whole thing about catalyst and response.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get catalyst response until quite a ways up in the system. And the first two catalyst response techniques or patterns are massive aggression
Mm-hmm.
and twin kimono.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, we're now talking about the vertical outward block, because there's a picture on 19, page 19. I'm really not going to worry too much about 18 because I don't do this stuff in a horse stance. So picture 18 and page 19, you've got the vertical outward block, which is, from a horse stance perspective, it's perfect. However, you go to the bottom of the page, and there's those 3 photos
Mm-hmm.
that have Mr. Trejo in a right neutral bow, or left, in a right neutral bow. Interesting. What are we seeing here? We're seeing an evolution of the thought of margin of error,
Mm-hmm.
complementary angle, make distance your friend. A lot of things that you see while he's in the neutral bow, you don't see in a horse stance. So it started with the thrusting inward block. No, it starts with the hammering. He does the hammering on page 14 in a neutral bow. He does the thrusting on page 17 in a neutral bow. And then he does the vertical outward block on page 19 in a neutral bow. It's another one of those things where you see it for decades and you don't really get it. So again, page 20, he's in a horse stance for the extended outward block. Page 21, he's doing it the way we do it in Island Kenpo. He's in a neutral bow. But he stopped. It doesn't show like it did in thrusting inward. It doesn't show anything other than the final position.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, why we tend to just miss some of these things, because there's no page 20A and 20B before there's 21, right? There's no description that says this is how you get to that position. And the big thing, the most important thing about Kenpo is that when you read the very first technique, you get step back to a right neutral bow. And there are some people who are smart enough to say, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, we came up in Kenpo and postmodern Kenpo, Postmodern Kenpo, we came up with the idea of step back naturally, step forward naturally. And that comes from my father's dancing as a dance instructor. He has knowledge. So here we go. Page 19, or page 21 shows the front and both sides. He's in his neutral bow with the extended outward block. I don't want to get in and create page 21A and 21B. It's enough to, if you understand blocking set or deflecting set in the context of doing it in neutral bow, then you don't really need those pages.
Mm-hmm.
They're worthless, really, because it's set in stone.
Well, I think what would be good is actually I can bring up the video.
Interesting. We go from somewhat out of context. If you and I are talking about blocking set or deflecting set, So the next one is inside downward palm down is out of context for blocking set itself. However, a lot of people have put inside downward palm down into blocking set because they're probably working on the reverses and the this, that, and the other thing, and there's an opposite of this and an opposite of that. I'm like, you know what? You're doing it in a horse stance. So on page 24, he's in the neutral bow again, and he's got his hand down straight, almost all the way straight, with his backhand checking. So I'm not going to talk about the horse stances at all. So the inside downward palm down and palm up, they are riding and chopping. The inside downward palm down I see as a riding motion. Inside downward palm up as a chopping motion. It's like the fleshy part, right? It's not, you're not going to go all the way to the other side of your body with these things. You're going to go right to the center of your mass and use that right there. And again, this whole idea of covering from one side of the square to the opposite side of the square on that plane has encouraged people to look at these things and insert them where they don't belong. Okay, so in page 24, he's doing it from a neutral bow. And it looks like maybe that's his point of origin. I'm not sure.
I think it's his point of origin.
That position doesn't, he's not doing a downward block. Do you see it, Chris?
Yeah, I see it. I think it's his point of origin.
Oops, I lost your vocal.
Oh, okay. Let me double check and see what's going on. Checking 1, 2.
I have no vocal.
All right, let me see what's up. Checking 1, 2. It's
Nothing.
getting recorded.
Yeah, I'm not getting any sound from you. I don't know how long that's been happening.
Checking 1, 2. Check, check. It's coming through on my end.
Yeah, no sound.
Okay, I'll hang up and
I wonder if that's on my side.
I'll call you back.
Hello.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Hi. Yeah.
All righty.
Okay.
We are back. I think it is his point of origin.
No. Okay, this is gonna be fun. I'll stay close to the phone. 23 has him. Oh, that's a downward, outside downward. So the next one after. Was I looking at the wrong thing? Pardon me, I'm pretty much foghead right now. Downward block. Okay, so page 23 establishes the downward block in a horse stance. That next page is a neutral bow, which it is. That's the downward block he's working on. So I was wrong. You got me?
Yeah, I got you. Oh, you there? Okay, we got audio. That'll work.
Okay. My phone is very sensitive. I don't like it. Okay, notes from the horse stance. No, I don't want to do that. He's ending it in a neutral bow, and notice that I think that his arm is mostly straight.
Which page are you on?
Which is interesting because a straight arm or a straightish arm that drives to the outside of the leg is not how it was shown to me. It was altered to be a bent elbow, and because you're blocking at the center of your mass, and if you think of it as a strike, then you're not going to follow it through as if it was a thrusting inner block or whatever. Okay. Okay. Next is the inside downward palm down. He starts in a horse stance, hand cocked way outside, and to the end point of that basic motion. He's in the neutral bow, facing front, side to side, and with his backhand checking. There really isn't. I mean, if we had the in between motions, like he does when he's in that horse dance, where they're showing midpoints with these, um, we could look at them and say, this is getting better, but it's not great, not the best. Um, but you won't find anything in here about the attacker in any of these books.
Mm.
You just won't find the catalyst, but you won't find the intent, especially in the pictures of Barbara Hale and Chappelle and all those other people at the end of book 5. So in the neutral bow, that inside downward palm down stops from the front view. His hand is stopping to the outside of his left thigh. That probably is okay, but we'll see what happens in the inside downward palm up to see if that's the same location he ends up, which I can already tell it may be. So page 26, excuse me. Page 20. Try again, Cole. Yeah, 26. 27 and 27 is in the horse stance. And now they're utilizing the 45-degree angle to take the photograph and insert the rectangle, which is there. So he cocks way out to the side. And when he stops on page 28 in the neutral bow, he's stopping at the center of his mass. So I think that both of those are fine because the inside downward palm down rides the motion. We know that from sparring. The inside downward palm up chops or hits or strikes. And if you think about the pattern thrusting salute, yes, we have the chopping or the inside downward palm up block, but we don't want to cover across the body with it because, as the boxers teach us, if you use your right hand to check a left hand punch, you're going to get hit by their right hand. Or am I saying that right? So the punch comes this way, it comes at me with the right hand, and I check it with my right hand. I've opened up a window of opportunity to get hit with the left hand. Okay, the upward block. Got a couple days?
Well, I think in the last 2 videos I did, we covered a total of, I think, about 45 minutes just mainly on the upward block. And mainly going back to how I originally learned it in 93, which was the squeegee all the way up above your head and get bonked on top of your head motion. That then instead, when I adopted the motion of having a center line, and this is where I wanted to talk about and bring up the new method of teaching this and using what I call the flippers, and maybe you can discuss how you kind of came up with that and what the results have been.
Okay, and we'll go to page 29 to start that out with the upward block.
Yep.
The 2 pictures are showing that are probably a product of that one video where Mr. Parker's using a piece of paper he's holding up in front of himself, and he travels up the arm to do that. It's very visual. I don't think he ever came back down that way, which would have been a good way to reinforce it. And on picture 20, I drew a square above from the top of it. I get kind of a perspective square from the top of his head down to his eyebrows, just to give the idea of passing through an area. Hopefully, if there'd been a third photo, you would see it right here. Let's see what page. Aha.
Yeah.
Page 30 shows this.
Yeah, pictures 21A through D and picture 22. Yeah.
Yeah. I drew another square because he's standing. He's not in a horse stand, I assume. And the idea is what you're calling flippers is an outgrowth of something that I learned from a guy named Animal, as I usually call him. Wow. Clyde O'Brien, where you would measure the distance traveled of your blocks and strikes by using your other arm. That's what the flexion set does. It teaches you about going to a point in time and space and using your opposite hand to help you find the dimensions or the proper dimensions of those blocks. So here, page 30, he's following the line of the example, and then he's coming up, and right about when he gets to his eyeballs, he starts to rotate and turn. This is one that he could have used at page 30A and 30B, because there's a couple of things going on in an upper block that most people are in way too much of a hurry to understand. So as you put the first flipper up and you match the angle, that teaches you about coming to the center of the mass when you're working in opposite directions. So when you get to that point and you push through and rotate at the fingertips, next motion is to open the hand facing you and simply slide down as you bring your opposite hand down horizontal to the ground. Perpendicular. The next motion is to cover or close, and you really don't change too much. I mean, you might pull in a little bit. I do. I notice that I tend to pull in, but I do things differently on both sides. And then from here, which you can't see, I'm going to open my hand up, palm up. I'm going to go to and as my opposite hand touches my hip, I drop the hand palm facing out, and I do the lesser deflection block. I come up to here to the pass-through chamber, and I put my hands together. So you're not obviously not going to be following your hand all over the place. At some point, you have to let it go and then come to here. But that's because of the nature of the lesser deflection block.
And in
that's
fact,
why we do. Go ahead.
Sorry, boss. I've got the video up on the other side from showing you sitting down at the fountain, starting the deflection set, and showing what you're talking about. So starting from a point of origin, coming up to prayer hands and then to Kenpo hands, is then coming up the center using the flipper. And what I do is when I teach the kids is using my fingertips as a tactile sensation of understanding when to start the rotation, not only just upward but outward for the upward block. One of the things I think we are missing within the method of training is the tactile response that this particular set gives us, which is non-existent in the previous models.
Yeah, it's kind of up to interpretation, isn't it? What's the height? What's the depth? What's all this? You know, what's the good of telling people about depth of action if they have to figure it out for themselves? I mean, basically, you don't want them figuring things out at this level. You want them to see how it works, and then to go on to the next thing, like a pattern or like a set or like a form, and say, oh, I know this already. Mm-hmm. These motions are familiar to me because I understand them. And that's what Island Kenpo is doing, basically, as it builds this inverted pyramid, and there's more than one pyramid, obviously. As it builds an inverted pyramid of instruction, it's teaching motion or method before it's teaching patterns. Mm. Now, I have the luxury. I've already been in December. It'll be 40 years for me, so I have that luxury that I can look at these things and say, "Hey, let's try this." Does that mean that everything's going to be good and everything's going to work? I don't expect it to be. No way. So, as you say, the flippers are that continuity. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. At no time are we grabbing, gripping the arm. We're just cradling the arm, and then boom, we're coming down, and then pop. So, if somebody says, "Hey, why aren't you pulling your hand back in the chamber?" Because you don't have to, because the hand goes past the hip, and the opposite hand just stops there. It's waiting for the next motion. You're feeding it. Almost that. Got to get more water.
Not a problem. And while Professor Cole is getting more water, as we're looking at the video of Professor Cole doing this, this introduces a very much a tactile way of teaching deflection set, aka blocking set, in a way in which helps us and our students understand their own dimensions of their bodies. That blocking set or deflection set is not a cookie cutter. We don't just have this pile of dough that's our students, and then we take this cookie cutter that all the blocks have to be the same size and depth and height. In fact, the whole point of tailoring is understanding our students' height, width, and depth, and then helping them understand what it is to do the set for themselves. So in my particular case, my arms are this long. My range of motion is dictated by my body, versus some of my students' arms are not as long as mine, and so I cannot use my arms to dictate their range of motion or their depth of action. That would be silly and it would be stupid. Instead, I'm letting their own bodies determine their depth of action for each of these blocks, which in this using these flippers gives us, for each and every one of our students, the correct depth of action and application of these blocks within their own body types, which I think was absent from the methods of instruction before. Not necessarily, and it wasn't a malicious thing, it wasn't a purposeful thing. I just don't think people were thinking about how to properly tailor the previous methods to especially the younger generation. Most of my students are between first grade and sixth grade. So I need a way in which to instruct them for their own body shape and type that gives them the best margin for error, the best possibility for them to execute these things in a way that fits their body and gives them the most chance of survival if in fact they ever have to use these things.
Yeah, you use the word tailoring, and we've had this discussion a lot. The tailoring is about the basics, and the basics and patterns are about the basics. So if we tailor the basics to be understandable, then it doesn't matter what the pattern is. You understand how that thing works, and that means that we add the word mercy point, and the words mercy point. So if you're thrusting inward strike, not block. If you're using a thrusting inward strike, and you hit the forearm with efficiently, that hopefully they'll give him a dead arm. Or you hit him in the bicep on the inside, or you fit the weapon of a chop to the outside edge of the neck, depending on position recognition. As long as those basics are functional, then you don't need a pattern, which is the biggest dichotomy of American Kenpo. It's the pattern is the pattern is the pattern, but the pattern is there to teach us something, not first. First they said you're not going to use the entire pattern, and then people say yes, you're going to use the entire pattern, which is a little nuts. Or you're just going to use part of it. It's called snippets. So on page 432, he's in the horse stance, and we're talking about the push down. Push down block, starting page 32. Pretty standard. It's the way I learned blocking set forever. And then the next page, 33, has him in the neutral bow again. But the push stance has a lot of depth of action. Most people are not doing the push down that far away. Now, I'm not sure whether that's Mr. Parker saying, hey, Frank, why don't you do it like this? I'm thinking Frank's going, oh, you know what? The sooner I get this hand out here, the sooner I make contact, and the more area I have to work with. What is it? This is an example of margin for error or margin for action. So by having his arm that far away, we're assuming that the person is bent over and be trying to tackle him. As soon as he gets that hand in contact with him, he gets to go from the square base of action, which is what a neutral bow represents, to a triangular base of action. Which means he can push down on the person's shoulder or on their head or neck while he moves his back foot. Now, triangular, square, and oval base of action is something we've recently added to what we do. So that hand is way out there, and I like it that way. I'm getting tired of seeing people do this. They're right in front of each other. I won't mention which Canadian Larry Tatum student does that.
Well, not
but
only
a lot of people are doing their push downs right in front of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, a lot of times when they're doing the push downs, it's 2 inches away from their body, which is not going to stop anything. But when I see this picture of Mr. Trejo doing this, this immediately brings to mind the method and action from Long 2. This is my point of origin for the push down outward elbow overhanging palm heel strike that we see in Long 2. I don't start it at my groin and push down to follow through. It starts out here where Mr. Trejo is. And I think that it's portraying something, like you said, not only giving us a margin for error, but margin for action. Because my hand is out here, I can shift weight into the target that then is the catalyst for the rest of the motion in Long 2.
I don't know if I probably did, but I don't remember if I talked to you about this. When you're talking about that push down, the rotating twist, the step through, the outward elbow, we're pushing down on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And by dropping our height into the twist, we're actually turning the person.
Mm-hmm.
So that our strike comes to the mastoid, which
Mm-hmm.
means right now that means that the claw actually should come out to here and then do that, because that's what we're doing at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the form, is we're starting to rip. We're using rips to claw. So as I push down and I rotate and I push down again, I start the outward elbow, and then I do there's the strike, there's the position at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, sometimes these pages need an A and B, so you can see. But
Mm-hmm.
these things are not really shown in American Kenpo in general. And the more that I did, as I got the Long 2 as a grab form, the more that I was learning about each motion, each transition. Why am I doing this? Why am I stepping from a cat stance to the right? Well, what's the Christian Kenpo technique where Christian grabs him?
Obscure kimono.
Obscure kimono. Well, that right there. If you don't have obscure kimono in your arsenal, then you're going to just pop into a cat stance, whether it's short form 2 or long 2. You're going to pop into a cat stance, and you're going to basically, your arms are going to come out way too soon, because you don't have an understanding of what is the catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. Grabs, you simply come out, right? So, and you match his intent with your response. So we want response, and then we've got our intent as we come out. I was just thinking about this about a week ago. Okay, so yes, we like the page 33. I like the depth of action of his push down. I do like that too. Page 34, an educational review. This is basically that 33A, 33B page,
Mm-hmm.
where it shows as a circle from here to here. I said, no, what are you doing? Well, if we follow the circle, that's a weird thing. Yeah, because it should be 1, 2, 3. What am I missing there? It shows.
So he's starting at the greater deflection downward block, coming all the way up to the upward block, and then coming into the hammering.
I never really saw that before. That's not going to work. That destroys the whole idea of following that piece of paper up through the upper block. I think the circle should start, or the line should start where there's upper block is, and then go right down to his hand, his downward block. But I wasn't there. I know. No, I
Yeah.
wasn't there to make distinctions on the editing. So then we got the next one over. He's actually kind of confusing, to tell you the truth.
Well, this looks like it
Big four
starts
solid.
with the palm, inside downward palm up block to the inside downward palm down block, then out to the vertical outward, extended outward, and then back to the palm
Okay.
up.
You're right. My brain is right. So I like the one on the right. I don't like the one on the left because it's saying something. Is it? No. Yeah, there is a line there. You can barely see the line on the one on the left. Yeah, but still, one, two, three. That still doesn't make any sense. It would make sense to do the hammering. Well, okay. I like the one on the right better. Okay, the organizational chart pairing blocks. Do we want to go through the pairing block?
No, I didn't want to cover the pairing blocks. What I would like to do, if possible, is to, if you have your laptop and if you can bring up the stream, I'll play the videos and then we can comment on them. The first one is the video that you did, I don't know, 8-9 years ago on blocking set 1 and going from the horse to the neutral bow. Just let me know when you have the stream up on your laptop.
You're gonna have to send it to me.
It's in Postmodern Kenpo on Facebook.
I'm not in Postmodern Kenpo anymore.
Oh, okay. Let me. Then just pull up YouTube, and then I'll send you a link to the videos that we're going to be watching. Surprise! Let me. Oops. So here we see Mr. Cole going right from a natural stance, stepping back naturally to the Kenpo hands, and then starting the blocking set 1 from your traditional perspective horse, hands chambered. And then he goes from the upward block, hammering inward, extended outward. Then he begins what we describe as the lesser deflection downward block. I know Mr. Cole could go into this way more than I can, but and I don't know where that dinging sound is coming from, so I apologize if you guys can hear it. When you have 10 different programs running at once, it's hard to determine where the noise is coming from. But
are you talking about the video where I'm describing? It's describing in red letters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, back in the old Trinity Karate for Christ studio. So right now we're at the extended outward block, and you're going to just drop the hammer in the lesser deflection downward block. So he goes down, and then he goes to what we now call the pass-through chamber. He continues the motion behind him, and if you guys have ever looked at Infinite Insights Book 3 as to the image or the diagram drawn by Edmund Parker on the range of motion, we have a range of motion both forward and backward. And if you guys take a look at the sideways picture in Book 3, you will see this range of motion being used in the lesser deflection downward block that brings us to the pass-through chamber for the push down in blocking set. You got some comments there, boss?
Getting harder. So ask me that again.
So do you have comments about the lesser deflection block versus the greater deflection block, and then the concept of pass-through chamber as we're doing blocking set in a neutral bow?
Well, it's the chicken or the egg idea, which came first. And basically, in this situation, the greater deflection block that we learned in deflecting hammer changed a lot of things. Um, Unfortunately, people are not using it, or they're using it improperly because they won't push off the right foot and gain distance with that thing, because it really is more because people are still hooked up into power blocking. I have to hurt somebody with my block. So the difference between greater deflection and lesser deflection would be how you move within the pattern, or within the form, or within the set. Everything, all your stances are transitory. You don't hold them for very long unless you're demonstrating them. And the lesser deflection, while in the neutral bow, the lesser deflection actually answered some important questions that I had in what is the effect of a greater deflection block and then chambering your hand. No one had a real good answer for what is happening there. Some people said it's a positional block. Some people, I mean, there's 3 or 4 different ways to describe it, and it's really kind of subjective. So the lesser deflection block, when utilized in blocking set 1, which is the neutral bow one, answered the question of what's happening with that block at that point, and how do we get to the next block? And it wouldn't be for another 8 years. Yeah, it wouldn't be for another 7.5, 8 years that we would have a pass-through chamber. But it was always there. You just didn't see it. Maybe somebody else has seen it. Maybe they got it with a different word terminology. But the greater deflection block is for a horse stance. The lesser deflection is for the neutral bow. And the greater deflection block is not something that I feature unless it's a major aspect of a pattern. In other words, as you get to thrusting salute, you have to understand what a greater deflection block is, because that's what you're accomplishing. That's what you're trying to do. Because if you try to use a lesser deflection, you would pull the person on top of you. Mm-hmm. You know, the idea or the lesson in thrusting salute would be to turn the person and have them step away. The idea of a lesser, did I say lesser deflection? The idea of a greater deflection is to turn the attacker so they can't kick a second time or throw an effective punch. Catalyst intent. Mm. The effect of a lesser deflection block is to pull the person towards you, because we're going to be immediately returning. Oh, look, there's a pass-through chamber there with that inward horizontal elbow strike to the masculine. And Chris knows all about that.
Oh, yeah.
With that. Put his arm up and Chris ran into it. I've seen it.
Yeah. Jack got me really good that we were doing deflecting hammer, and I came at him with a pretty good kick, and he used that lesser deflection block to pull me right into him. And as my foot's in the air, I'm going, oh my goodness, I am going to eat every inch of this thing. And then as I'm landing, my force meets his, and it's just a train wreck. And he stopped himself, thankfully, and his elbow hit me right here in the mastoid, and he had to catch me because I was out for, I don't know, what, a split second. Yeah, but it was enough.
You can tell by your eyes and your body, you just like, we're on the verge of just complete collapse.
Yep.
Oh.
So we're on the video that they're seeing is the side view of blocking set 1 in the video, because I wanted to quickly talk about how the neutral bow and doing it in the neutral bow changes the depth of action versus in a horse stance, because that's one of the biggest things that my students, when we changed from the horse stance to the neutral bow, is they were still trying to approach the blocks as though they were in a horse stance. Everything became the same depth of action, versus in a neutral bow, it gives you the opportunity to have several different planes of action with each of the blocks.
Yeah, the sometimes I write things and I'm like, I look back later on, I'm going, did I really write that? So the text um, at about 4:16 for the video says, when seen from the side, BS1 teaches important lessons that are not seen head on, which is exactly what you were talking about. The need to group actions for multiple strikes is apparent once the set moves from the static horse to a static neutral go. You said all this. CPAC adapts the changes in the downward block and the base stand. So we change the downward block, the rate of deflection, and the stand. Depth of action changes where the height of blocks does not. You must have watched this a lot of times.
I have over the years, ever since it was first made. But this is what we see is each block has its own zone or range of action that it covers within the set, which is not apparent when you do it in the horse stance, which is great for giving our students the understanding that depending upon their need gives them tools in which to use within that particular zone of action. If we're using the horizontal accordion blind, as we see in book 3, is giving them a description of farthest out, next closest, in between. This path of action covers 4 different zones with a lesser deflection downward. And then the pass-through chamber and push-down is within a singular zone. And what's great is that it gives our students the opportunities of understanding this that they wouldn't have had if we just did blocking set 1 in a horse stance.
This is a 4-minute 16 video, 4-minute and 16-second video, and I picked the wrong number, but at 1:14, the next I would say slide, the text says, seen from the side, the flow of action details how the timing of the first 3 blocks is not the same as the last 3 blocks. One of the things, I haven't thought of this in a very long time, one of the first things that I incorporated when I taught an upper block, having seen so many rising, this garbage, I said I would get people up here and I'd get them to a position at a point in time and space, and I would say the closest to the attacker is the fist. The next closest is the elbow, and then the face.
Yes.
And what that did is it created that margin of error, not just to come up and do this, not just for them to not just interpret what they saw me do, because I can do it till I'm blue in the face in the correct way. But if I don't teach them how to do it, how do you step back? So it's fist, elbow, face. One of those temporary teaching methods that I adopted, starting back in about, let's say, 2002, 2003.
I remember that being a part of one of our first lessons.
Really?
Yep. So I wanted to talk about not quickly, but towards the end of our discussion today. If you have YouTube up, type in Premier Martial Arts International, and then something called Star Block Set that they have. And thankfully I have the volume muted. And I wanted to stop at a couple of different points in this video and show you this. This is kind of the way I originally learned a type of blocking set, 26 years ago now.
You said Premier Martial Arts
International, and they call it Star Block Set. It's a lady in a black gi, and unfortunately, not to sound derogatory, but this looks like a Taekwondo studio that's trying to also teach Kenpo.
Mm-hmm. There she is.
Yep, you got it?
Yeah, I did.
So she's out. So she's out in this really wide horse stance, and And I'm going to stop once she does the first block. So at least she doesn't windshield wiper it. I'm at 16 seconds in. But if we were to look at a sideways picture of this, her depth of action is probably, she's maybe got that fist right in front of her face. Maybe. Versus the depth of action you guys just saw in the previous video is I have probably 18 to 20 inches between my fist and my face. The problem with this is if a person has a weapon such as a karambit and I hook the karambit up and over that arm, I'm going to slice up her scalp. Or maybe if I bring it down with enough force, I'm going to scoop into the eye cavity and she's going to be blind.
Yeah.
You look at the articulation in the wrist I have with the karambit. If I go up and over that block, so to speak, she is toast.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is two things I'm looking at with her is the empty space between her bicep and her ear and high cheekbone, and the shadow that's covering her right eye.
Yeah.
Which means there's no power in that action. Absolutely no power. You can look at these people and the way they do things and say, yeah, this is all about gaining a belt and being a black belt at some point in a short amount of time. But actually functional basics, they don't really have any. And she did kind of squeegee it, but it's not as bad as most. So I'm looking at that gap or that space, and I'm looking at the shadow. It's really not even, her fist is not even shadowing her whole right eye, which is unfortunate. And her deltoid should be a lot closer to her ear than it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no backup mass behind that at all.
Yeah.
And
I mean, she goes up against a guy 225 pounds and tries to throw that block. Her shoulder's gone, her head's gone, everything's gone. She's not going to be able to use that basic motion at all.
So we see her going from this block here to then she's coming into your traditional sweeping block, which I originally learned is an inward block. So she goes from here and she brings her arm in straight in front of her to where, yes, it is somewhat covering her center line. But what does this action here, if you look at me, boss, what does this action accomplish?
Well, it covers the I don't remember what page it was in book 3, but when I drew those squares, perspective squares over Mr. Trejo, the action, the fist, I think they're still blocking with their forearms, to tell you the truth. Sometimes I have to go, wait, step back. Right now, I think she's blocked with the forearm to get there as quickly as possible.
I agree, yeah.
And the fist doesn't really have much to do with it, to tell you the truth. So it's her deltoid again is compromised because the arm is not anchored in any way. She's halfway between a hammering and a thrusting inward block. And of course, they can call it whatever they want, but it's just halfway through. And her depth of action is no good. The conceptual box and the square just don't exist for these people.
Yeah, she's hovering right around in the direct middle of the conceptual box.
Yeah, she's at that halfway point that we see in book 3 when he's doing it on horse. So is it? I don't know. Sometimes I just don't want to. I watch these things and I just don't want to comment or think about it.
I know, and I'm forcing you to. And we go to 24 seconds in the video. She goes to what we would call an extended outward block. But once again, unfortunately, I hate saying bad things about people, but the majority of American Kenpo today goes to this position out here for the extended outward block. And if you look at me, let me get in the center of the video. Is my arm at all connected with the muscles in my shoulders and my pec and my back? No.
Not at that point.
No.
Disassociated.
I've disassociated any of this motion with the rest of my body, which means that if anyone were to put any weight on my arm, it's going away. And this is what I do with my students: is if they stop at this position, I will lean on their arm and they'll just immediately collapse. Versus in going from, let's say, a hammering inward position to them pushing out. Notice here I've stopped at the edge of my shoulder. I put my students up against a wall and they go from the hammering inward position to pushing their hand, and it stops at their shoulder. It does not go beyond. And at this point, right now, my bicep is touching my pec, and because my muscles are flexed and tight, I can feel the connection. If I had a piece of paper between it, it wouldn't go anywhere.
And you can stop the block, whether it's vertical outward or extended outward, better once you tighten up the pectoral. That's how you stop.
Yeah.
You don't stop the hand, you tighten up the body. Yeah, the thing is, I can kind of shortcut this whole discussion about her by simply saying that though she's doing it slowly, and she's showing endpoints, beginning points and endpoints, when they do it, they're just going to do it so fast that none of it makes any sense. And what we're discussing is better left discussing with our students and people who are willing to ask, why is this like this? Why are you doing it like this? You know, the good, pretty good, better, and best.
Oh,
this
so
kind of thing is not,
so you
this kind
added
of
a
thing is not even
category.
good. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good. It's like, oh, do I really? You know, it's like Frank doesn't smile with people he doesn't like. Ray doesn't smile with people he doesn't like. You know, that kind of thing.
So we
With the
know.
fellows.
So we notice at 31, she begins her downward block at her shoulder, and it's the greater deflection downward block. But just like me 26 years ago, learning it in a horse stance, where our hand goes not only beyond our base, which at that point was the horse stance, it goes beyond and outside. And even she's in such a wide horse stance, and her fist is still going beyond her knee.
And your arm is extended completely.
Yeah.
Taekwondo.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why I made the comment to where it doesn't say on here specifically, and I didn't do any research as to what this school teaches. I'm assuming it's some sort of either XMA or Taekwondo studio that's trying to incorporate Kenpo material to expand out their curriculum to make things a little bit.
Or even worse, just to add another label on their sign, because other places say Kenpo.
Yeah.
People that came in and said, "Oh, do you do Kenpo?" I was like, "No."
And if you,
but,
yeah, no, I know, and just like there is a karate school here in Rapid City, which is an hour and a half away from me, and the listing of martial arts that they teach at the school is longer than my arm. It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Jiu-Jitsu, karate, Krav Maga, Kenpo. They go through 20 or 30 different things. You know, just so that the front of the window in the studio looks like they teach a billion different things. And we go to we're at 40 seconds on the video, and she goes to the push down block, and it's literally right in front of her groin.
Right in front of you.
So it's literally, she goes from this greater deflection downward block, she flips over her hand, and it just comes in front of her groin. And
notice she looks down too.
Yeah.
Did I do that right?
Yeah. It's one of those very interesting things. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, this next video is actually from, well, you can look it up, boss, while I'm talking about it. It's called Rock Solid Kenpo Blocking Set. Yeah, I kind of figured you'd say that. I'm not purposely trying to pick on anybody. I just picked some of the first Kenpo blocking set videos. I typed in Kenpo blocking set, and these are some of the first videos that came up when I searched on YouTube. So I'm just doing a cross section of American karate studios that teach Kenpo. So let's get past the introduction here. He starts at
Are you talking about the rock solid Kenpo way for learning?
it's the Rock Solid Kenpo. It says block set 2, the Rock Solid Kenpo way.
Okay, the top one.
Yeah, but since he starts with blocking set at the beginning of it, we'll talk about it. I'm not going to get into blocking set 2 with this particular video because
This is Skip's guy.
yeah, this is a Skippy guy. So he steps out into his horse. He begins there. We're at 18 seconds in. Now, you notice there he kind of comes up to the center line, but everything's a chopping block. The whole set becomes chopping. There is no idea of a riding the force or point of contact, point of penetration, and margin for error. It's all chopping blocks. And one thing I want whoever's watching this, both now and later, to notice, look at the depth of action. It's hard to tell because this is a straight front-on video, but watch the depth of action in these blocks and ask yourself, are they the same depth or is each block at a different depth? And he does not cross his center line even in the horse stance.
Okay, let's not say too many bad things. This is probably the worst example of blocking set that you can find out there. There's all the things that are important to us: depth of action, completion of the motion, paths and angles, paths and lines, excuse me, are not in this. Everything is pushed out too far away or pushed in too close. In other words, he has a artificially contracted outer rim and outer perimeter, and then he's okay with inner rim and inner perimeter, but his outer rim and his outer perimeter are
non-existent.
Like a flat tire.
Yeah, it's non-existent, to be honest.
Yeah, and most of the stuff that when I look at these guys, most of the stuff is done in a square or the conceptual box that is flat, almost completely flat. The downward block is the only reason why he would go below his operational area, which is from his chin down to a solar plexus.
Mm-hmm.
They only care about this area, chin to solar plexus. And then, of course, they have to fill the downward block. So it's not low enough. It's not, his arm's almost all the way straight. But again, this is an aspect of let's just do it fast and get it over with.
Yeah.
Let's get that belt.
Let's get that belt. Let's go through our sets as, ludicrous speed as possible just to get it done. And yet then, I got to visit a Kenpo studio in Utah and to work with the students there. And you start asking them, what is the block accomplishing? What is it for? What techniques does it show up in? How are we using it in those techniques? And they have literally no clue. And these were purple, blue, and green belts in the 24 American Kenpo system. They had no concept of what blocking set was for and how it is infiltrated into the system. The last video I wanted to look at as we're talking about today is Texas Storm Kenpo blocking set 1.
Did you see the video of Harley?
Of whom?
Harley, his brown belt head.
No, I haven't watched it at all.
Skip it.
Yeah, I won't.
Now I know why you were so okay, we've got a couple of them. We got a white belt doing it and a blue belt doing it.
Blue belt guy.
A blue belt guy.
And we'll watch the blue belt guy, who should have had enough time working through the system to understand a little bit more about blocks and how they're used, and that should influence the way he does blocking set. But let's take a look. He yaks up until, I don't know, about 30 seconds in. Yeah, 35 seconds in, he actually starts doing the blocks. So he brings his fist up to his belly button to start the upward motion of the upward block. He kind of comes to the center about halfway through in front of his face. At least he's not blocking his eyes. And then once he's here, he immediately brings his elbow up and does what I call chicken winging for the rest of the motion for the upward block. So it starts at a chicken wing at his belly button, comes up to the center line because they may be seeing that two-hour seminar with Mr. Parker where he spends about half that time with that piece of paper in front of his face to describe what they're supposed to be doing, and then he chicken wings out to finish the block.
I agree.
Yeah. And then
and the interesting thing is, this is analyst of motion. Sometimes it just gets kind of old. When he goes to the next block, he makes a circle out of it.
Yeah.
He drops the elbow and he does a little flare, and he comes in and does all that as if, because what that is he's mentally chambering his hand.
Yes.
And it comes over to his belly button, he's chambering. Okay, chamber, block. Okay, come over, chamber, block. Okay, over, over, chamber, block. That's you shouldn't be doing. Okay, whatever.
Well, and that's one of the first things. If someone were to actually read the description of blocks in book 3, one of the things that Mr. Parker says twice is from point of origin. Hello? If Mr. Parker said it, then don't you think we should actually apply it? Point of origin is wherever your hands may be at that point. Too much of this type of motion is carried over, unfortunately, and I don't want to sound too derogatory, from Tracy Kenpo in everything must cock to chop or cock to block. That's why you see people doing delayed sword after the hammering inward block. They bring their hand up to their ear to then begin the chop. No, delayed sword is from the point of the block, is from that point of origin is the chop. And it's something that is absent in American Kenpo, in which Mr. Parker, I watch seminars, and it seems like he's frustrated because nobody seems to get it.
I agree. In your example of where the chop comes from, it's unfortunate that people think that chambering the hand before a strike, which comes from the Okinawan system, it's not a traditional American Kenpo thing, but the idea of pulling the hand back away for distance before strike is how they gain power. And then, of course, I've done this a few times with a few black belts, where I've actually done delayed sword with them, and then I kicked, and then I contoured up their arm, and then I hit them I told them to put their hand up. You gotta have the hand up. Then I hit them with it, and they're looking at me like two reactions. Wow, I gotta learn that. And the other one is not how my instructor teaches.
Mm-hmm.
This is an example of this is how my instructor wants it done, and I've got the blue belt to prove it.
Well, and then you go to 58 seconds in, and he's at that extended outward position, and it's even farther than the girl in the earlier video. There is nothing behind this. Literally nothing.
His arm in the downward block.
Yeah.
And it's completely outside of his body. And he didn't cover the center of his mass with it. Because he's not, well, as we have developed over the years, elbows aim hands, knees aim kicks.
Yep.
If you think that the hand is the thing that is the controlling factor, this is what you get.
Yes. And so I would say, as I described in the video recorded from our classes on Tuesday, that I described the Kenpo in which we teach our students as elbow-centric.
Mm-hmm.
was a term that I kind of used and threw out towards my students, because I talked about in doing a rising knee to get them used to the 4 steps of a kick. I talked about grabbing our opponent and then pulling them in. And I wanted them to feel their elbows up against their bodies and having it come in to help prevent chicken wings. And I said, get used to this position or this feeling, because that is where, when we go to blocking set, this is where you should feel comfortable. This inner rim, which we need to do a video about, um, this motion with the elbows is core to what we teach in Kenpo. It may not be talked about as much, but it is the point of view of the instructor to get our students from elbows out, the chicken wing stuff we see here, to having the elbows in.
Yeah. I'm fading, Chris. I'm fading
No,
fast.
I know you are, and that was actually the last video I wanted to look at. So did you have any closing remarks? And maybe at a future date we will cover parries, inward, outward parries, and checks, pushing, pinning checks, and that.
Well, like we said before, deflecting set is there to give depth of action, to measure how far your arm goes out, to then understand. We're not teaching it right off the bat, but to understand the outer rim and what the outer perimeter is. Long form 1, of course, is really good at understanding what the outer perimeter. Blocking set is there to introduce the lesser deflection and the pass-through chamber. And blocking set in a horse stance, you might as well just be sitting down doing it, because it really doesn't help that much. Unless, of course, your introductory lessons are throwing strikes at somebody after half an hour, and then saying, how good you did. It's kind of a bugaboo of mine. So you've got three ways to look at that. 2 is a set, and 1 is sorry. 2 is blocking, and 1 is as deflecting. If you don't teach, if you teach deflecting set before you teach blocking set, in a neutral bow, then you don't even have to call it blocking set. They'll know exactly what they're doing. They'll understand that we're going to drive that hand, or we're going to drive that elbow, and the controlling actions are important to understand. The depth of actions are important to understand. Yeah, because it'll extend itself out to something like known kimono, how you can pin and then punch the elbow instead of using the sweeping rising forearm block.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Kenpo is that when you look at it in a way that has not been looked at before, at least to your knowledge base, you begin to see how many things are related in American Kenpo. I just did. I posted something for you and Tabja about assigning the lines, the 4 primary lines. And even though that's probably 350 words, it could have gone 1,000 words easily. And the references would have been just out. I mean, it's like, might as well just post it instead of putting it in a message. So this is why we're doing the heavy lifting. Unfortunately, Mr. Parker did all the heavy lifting, and nobody kind of helped him out. I think Frank probably helped him out. Apparently so. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about the depth of action.
It is, and that's the primary thing when I've been judging at tournaments, and you see kids doing short form 1, and then they put blocking set at the end of it when they're in their horse stance. The first thing I'm looking for is it all the same depth of action, and what is driving it? Is it hand centric or is it elbow centric? And I think a lot of, unfortunately, we should do another video on this, of how kind of the crossovers between my theological mind and training carry over into Kenpo, and vice versa, the marrying of the two. in how I look at things as either being Bible-centric or man-centric. In the same way, I view Kenpo being it's either hand-centric or it's elbow-centric.
Yeah. Yeah.
But with that, I know, thank you, Mr. Cole, for coming on with us, even though you've been sick. And I'm not, I've got some kind of cold or something going on. But it was a prime opportunity for us to get together and to clarify that video that we did in which nobody could hear you. And yeah, people were saying that they could hear you. So this will go up, and I don't care if we get flack. It's one of those things. I almost feel like we're a voice crying out in the desert. Sometimes biblical reference there for some of you people, about what I feel Mr. Parker wanted to happen, but because of either politics or the way that the association was growing, or just people not really willing to learn things that he wanted to get across in the later years between 1988 and 1990, that just wasn't getting across. You can see it clearly in his teaching videos of him doing seminars. You just have to sit and listen and watch to see some of these insights pop out.
Well, what you just said reminds me of the yearly conversations I had with Leilani, both at the studio for the rules meetings, and then later on in the podium at the internationals. I got a pretty good scoop on just about everybody, on the people who did them wrong, and the people who are clueless about what they're doing, and the people who are ripping them off. They just, if you had Leilani's ear, you pretty much knew the history of what was going on outside of the actual training. And she didn't really have much good to say about anybody. Because that family had been taking a lot of crap for many years. Mm-hmm. They were screwed over so many times. Whole idea of I'll get my rank and I'll take my lessons. Well, we know that's not true. We know most of the people who went from third to fourth or fifth then screwed over Mr. Parker and didn't take the lessons, or screwed over Mr. Trejo and didn't take the lessons. And I certainly wish that I had been there to take those lessons. I don't know that it would have. If I know now what I knew then, I'm like, yeah, I'd take the damn lesson. Just talking to Dave Crouch about stuff that he talked to him about, and it's mostly just, how does this work? Don't show me the pattern. Just how does this work? There's so many who had the opportunity and just didn't do it. Okay, so.
Well, it is life. Hindsight's 2020, but that gives us somewhat of what Mr. White's been talking about lately, is the seniors that know things, get to know them, take the lessons, have those conversations while they're here, because like Mr. Parker, they're not going to be here forever. And the same thing applies for us in talking with Pat, having more conversations with Pat and gleaning from him while he's still here. Not that I'm thinking Pat's going away anytime soon, but we have a finite time with our instructors and our mentors, and we need to cherish that time, because one day, like you ask anybody that was Mr. Parker's student throughout the decades, is after he passed away, they couldn't just pick up the phone and call him and ask him, oh, hey, how does this work?
Exactly.
So with that, it's been long enough for everybody. You guys have a great day. Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for coming on and talking with us. And this is going on the internet. Bye, y'all.
Okay. See you later.